I turned 68 yesterday and I'm feeling cranky. In the last 2 weeks, I lost a very dear friend who, like me, has given 40 years to the project of collecting data about women's gender pay gap. And in my view, there should be more cranky women in this parliament with that kind of experience who can say, we need to do what this bill proposes, certainly. We need more transparency in our data on the gender pay gap. But data is not going to cut it, my friends. I've spent 40 years collecting that data, or I've written the books, and my friend, Michelle Hogan, who we've lost, spent many of those years working alongside me amongst low-paid women, trying to improve their conditions of employment. And Michelle's 40 years are measured in many ways in activism and in making a difference through the union movement and the women's movement. I have on my desk today a photo of us together at a round table on gender pay inequity in 1991, out of which came a book about what's wrong and what we need to do. So we worked together for many decades and our data have not changed. This is not to diminish the incredible work that the Workplace Gender Equality Agent does and efforts by governments, people in this place, over decades to attempt to shift these numbers. But they will not shift through the collection of transparent data. That will not be what is necessary, because what's going on in our labour market is not just about the gap between people in workplaces on full-time earnings, and we cannot deal with the gender pay gap just by looking at pay data. So I support, as my colleague Senator Waters has pointed out, all of the measures in this bill and the need to go further on better data collection. We need to look at what's going on, for example, at the gap between part-time workers' earnings, men and women. That's where the gap is very wide, and we need to look more carefully at total earnings, at bonuses, at superannuation, at cars, at all the things that men get more of and women get less of. But we need to do a whole lot of other things too, and I think of my friend Michelle as I talk about them. And I want to firstly mention what's going on amongst our low-paid workforce. Unless we lift the pay of women in feminised occupations, as is recommended, and I see my fellow colleagues from the Select Committee on Work and Care, as is recommended in our recently tabled report out of the Select Committee on Work and Care, unless we lift the pay in those feminised occupations, that is, the childcare workers, the aged care workers, the disability workers, the nurses, the people in all of those systems of care, a huge economy of the services sector, where 90% of people work and women work in every workplace at the bottom. Unless we lift those pay rates of those workers and also improve their conditions, we will not narrow the gender pay gap. And a group of very sad parliamentarians will be standing here in 40 years lamenting the pay gap. We have to do better than that. And one of the ways we have to do better is by changing the conditions of employment for women in those low-paid service and care industries. They need more than an improvement in their pay rate. They need more security in their jobs. So many of them are casual. So many of them cannot predict what hours they're working tomorrow or next week. They're in the retail sector. Their employers can predict how many Granny Smith's apples are needed in aisle 6 tomorrow, but they can't tell those workers what their hours will be. They can't tell those workers what their pay will be. And unless we fix the rostering systems, the uncertainty around rostering, the insecurity of employment, we can sing in here all day about the gender pay gap, but we will make no difference. We have to do more than that. We also have to improve the conditions and system of work that supports women. Women's pay is low because they take time out of the labour market to care for others, for their kids, for their parents, for their friends and their partners. We can afford to move our paid parental leave as a first step beyond 26 weeks. It's a good thing that we're going to 26 weeks paid parental leave, but that's not enough. That takes us to half the international standard. We've recently had costings done on what it would take to take our paid parental leave system to 52 weeks at minimum wage. It'll cost $2 billion a year. That is 10% of the amount annually of the Stage 3 tax cuts. And we women have to come in here and beg for those menial, I mean, it's not nothing, $2 billion, but by hell, it's not $25 billion, which is going to mostly men on higher pay. It's time we lifted our paid parental leave system to reach more seriously towards the OECD average. We are at the bottom of the heap, along with the US, and we should do better in a very wealthy country that can afford to buy very expensive submarines. We hear and give a tax cut to mostly men on over over 120,000 a year, over 200,000 a year. The third thing we need to do, these are my top. I could go all day, and I have a limit, which is just as well. The third thing we need to do was referred to by my colleague Senator Waters. Yesterday, we were at a meeting at a committee for the Friends of Working Women in this place, and it was a very interesting morning, looking at data that Dr Anne Summers has collected and put before us about the relationship between poverty and violence. So we have good data on this now, which tells us that so many sole parents are alone because they have escaped a violent circumstance, and they are at the bottom of the labour market, insecure in their jobs, where they can find them, and dependent on a payment which in 2013 was cut, as my colleague said, by $100 a week. And Anne Summers made the point that if our Prime Minister, if the Prime Minister had been brought up by his mother under the regime, the current level of job seeker payment, he was more likely to be in juvie than in the Prime Minister's office. People who grow up in poverty have a higher rate of imprisonment, have a lower rate of opportunity throughout their education and into employment. And what we've done since 2013 is confine so many sole parents to poverty with dire consequences for their children, for their families. We lose them at the very least as taxpayers. We lose them in our professional workforce. They're one of the reasons that poor payment system is why our labour supply is short. If in other countries where good support is given to sole parents, where good support is given to working mothers, where labour systems don't let 25% of the labour force be casualised or insecure, they have a higher participation rate. No surprise. In a country like Sweden, an average participation rate of women that's 8 percentage points higher than here. That's an average increase in the participation rate of 4 percentage points, and that's worth $100 billion a year. Even if you want to spend it on submarines, God forbid, or on tax cuts for people on over 200,000, we could pay over and over again for a much better regime of support for our working women. And God knows we could support a Rolls-Royce system of data collection. It wouldn't be worth the paper it was written on unless we did the essential support changes that our women in our country need. And it is time that we stopped collecting endless amounts of data without taking the action, which is not to diminish the important work that feminists throughout and workers throughout our public sector do in collecting that data. But unless we are putting alongside that collection the actions that will make a difference, the policy supports that will make a difference, and the real interventions that we have known for decades. My friend Michelle Hogan has known for decades. I have known for decades. Any amount of research evidence will tell you the solutions are there, but they do not lie in collection of data. They lie in action, and that's what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pocock.